Alright, hello everyone. I hope you had a great weekend. So let's start. So this week, and the first topic is about the increase of the population. In some cases, there would be the decrease of the population, but as far as we know, there will be some of the increase or the population growth in the human population. So I will introduce some of the theories and what are some factors increasing the trends of the population growth or population decline in the human population history. So, as I mentioned before on my lecture slides, these are very minimal summarizations. So once you start studying with your textbook, and you will watch my lecture, and these will be the key information to develop or to increase or to raise up your quiz scores. So your midterm and the final, these will be also based on my lecture and the textbook reading and the lecture slides. So please make sure to read over your textbook chapters and my lecture slides and watch my video so that you can have the better sense of the contents I will cover for this semester. So the weekly quiz, if you already finished your weekly quiz, you just saw the confirmation of the submission of the quiz. You may not see your grade yet, because that was intentionally done. Because if you finish your quiz and if you get to know your grade and what would be the good answers and the wrong answers, maybe you can share the answer to your other classmates. I know you will not do that, but just in case to avoid any of the possibility of the bleach of the answers, I usually wait until all the students finish the quiz so that everyone can have the fair chance to complete the quiz without any of the possibility of the cheating or other academic dishonesty issues. So the old grade will be posted after the completion of all students of the quiz. Other than that, please make sure to study before taking the quiz, because the quiz will be there are 4 quizzes in this semester, and then the 4 quizzes are added up as 100 points. So that will be a very big part of your total grade. So please make sure to complete the quiz on time and study before the quiz. Alright. So part 1 of the population growth is what are the past patterns of the population changes. So what were the contribution of the factors of the population growth or others? This is the population change history. So you can see that a long time ago, very long time ago, there were the very minimal levels of the population changes, because there was very high rate of the deaths and there were high rates of the births. So the offset of the births and the deaths, these were contributing to the low levels of the population changes. However, there was very gradual changes, usually the increase of the population in the world, but there was very big downturn. You can see the very big downturn of the population change, and you may see that was the time of the period of the plague, which means because of the very highly infectious disease, at least about 30% of the population in the European countries were dead or killed by the infectious disease at that point in time. So that was a very big factor of the population change. But after that, after the modernization and after the highly increase of the human technology and the medical facilities, there was a very big and very huge increase of the population. So this trend was very fast. So you might guess some demographers were worried about the very highly skyrocketing increase of the population, because they worried a lot about the limitation of the resources, such as natural resources and some of the energy resources based on fossils. So we can see that there would be very different perspectives of the population growth in the human history. Again, this is another graph by the estimation of the United Nations. There was very big increase and there was very steep increase of the population. So that was why, because it was not very linear, but very, very exponential increase of the population was very big concern of the population studies. And again, we can see that these are the proportion of the population of the country. And as I mentioned before in the last lecture, there was China is the most populous country, and India is the second one, and the United States is the third populous one. And you can see that based on the size, because the size of the volume represent the number of population, and we can see that there are very big countries like that: Japan, Nigeria, Brazil, and Indonesia, Philippines, and there are many of the countries we can see, and the proportions of the population would be very big in the world population. So we have very big number of population, very, very large number of population, but how long can we survive? So that is very big question in the population, as studies a part of the future of the population in terms of the population projection. So the classic demographers, they worried a lot about the future of the humankind. So the quick question, I want to ask one quick question for you. So have you ever experienced any hunting? And did you see and did you catch or did you get some animals? And what was it? Was it very easy or was it very difficult? So for me, based on my experience, I've never done of the very classical types of the hunting, like using the bows or the guns. But we can see, I can imagine how hard it was, because if you use a bow or other kind of weapons, that will be very, very difficult. So for example, I fulfilled my military service in South Korea. So I served as military force, and about 2.5 years. My assigned role was the supply, demander, and in the cooking. And so sometimes when I did the practice, I used the M16, which is the one kind of a very old style rifle. And when I tried to shoot in very limited practice, it was very, very hard to make a bullseye shots. So, but even though using very highly developed weapon, not that far from the target, it was almost impossible to have very great score in the shooting. Maybe because I was not very good at shooting in the shooting practices in the military situation, but it possibly means that the hunting with the very classical types of weapons would be very, very difficult. Okay, but other than that, because I worked as the supply department and governed by the restaurant system of the military base, there were many of the wild animals. There were many of the insects and wild cats, and many of the insects, and the biggest enemy was the mice, because they were very big they are very trendsetter of the infectious disease of every time. But other than that, so we can see that in the early type of the human history, that stage was governed by the hunter-gatherer system, which means if they want to get the food, they need to hunt on those animals. As we could see in the previous slides, we can imagine that the hunting would be very, very difficult. So in that case of time, keeping the large size of the family and keeping the very high increase of the population in that period of time was very, very difficult at the point of time. So after that, there was, instead of the roaming and instead of the moving a lot, there was some kind of the trials to reside in a specific area. So based on the very relying on the animals, based on the domestic animals, there were some of the increase of the production. But as you can see in the video, the volume will be very high. Sorry about that, I could not control this volume here. But you can see that Oh, it's too big. So we can see that this scene would be very, very normal scene in that point, at that point in time. So for these animals, the human and individuals needed to feed them so that they can survive based on the production of these animals. So they, in some certain types of the grass, and these are the foods of those animals, but they needed to move some area later, about 3 months later or 6 months later, so that they can have enough a volume of the grass and move again. So that was the kind of situation that we can see. They need to move a lot, but that was much better than the hunting system. And again, the whole horticultural societies based on the cultivation of the plants, that was not very developed, very sophisticated ways of the agricultural situation, but at least they could stay in the area based on the production of those plants. And then the agricultural societies and the food societies, there were the accumulations of the belongings and the personal belongings and the properties. And then after that, the food, and because of the limitation of the productions, it was very hard. It was almost impossible to have very high levels of the increase of the population, because in order to have the very high levels of the increase of population, they needed to survive. They need to have very high levels of the live births, and they needed to survive longer than before, and they needed to survive protected from any kind of the very dangerous situation by the disasters, and the disease killed a lot of people at every time, and many of the climate changes and things like that. So at that point in time, it was very, very hard, and even though they had very high birth rates, there were many of the fluctuating death rates, usually very, very high death rates. So that was the main factor why there were many of the slow increase of the population. But other than that, after that, we could see the industrial revolution. After the modernization and the invention of the steam system and the steam factory system, the humankind, the individuals, and many of the countries and societies, they could have the mass production, which means that there would be very high volume of the production, which can support large amount of the people compared with the previous period of time. So based on the scholars' theory, we can see that in the long time, in the ancient theory, having the more population was a very big factor of creating the strong country or strong political power. So long time ago, be fruitful in the multiply, kind of the Bible, and so this class is not based on the religion, but very old statement of the religious belief and the religious document. There was the favor. There was statement of favoring the large amount of the people, and then the population quality more important than quantity. There were many of the different perspectives, but the recent one, for example, the Malthus, I would mention that the father of the modern population history and the modern the population theory, he worried a lot because the population increase exponentially, while food supply grows arithmetically, which means the exponential means the power, the 2 square and to power 3 or to power 4, and that will be a very huge increase within the specific time. But arithmetic increase will be just 2 times more, 3 times more, so that will be very linear changes of the production of the agricultural products. So because of the mismatch between the speed of the population growth and the supply of the agricultural or the food resources, so the Malthus warned about the very early human extinction. So he wanted to control the increase of the population, such as the controlling the fertility or others. Male Malthusian, they wanted to decrease or control the birth, so that they can have some measures of the controlling the population. But other than that, the Martian, they said the population size is not a big matter, but the distribution of the population or the distribution of the resources would be the more problematic. So these were some of the very keen arguments between the Malthusian and the Marcian, because one part, the Malthusian, they wanted to have some efficiency so that they can keep the current level of the population, but blocking the possibility of the increase of the population by controlling the fertility rate. But the Marcian, they wanted to have some more the equal distribution. So the problem of the population or the problem of the earth or the survivability is very, very unequal distribution of the resources instead of the size of the population. So they would say that the size of the population and the high levels of the birth rates would not be a big problem compared with the unequal distribution. Alright, so the demographic preference theory I will cover a little bit later, and this is also the finding on the divisions of the stages to explain the population changes as very fast increase of the population. But in these days, the population increase is not that fast. Based on the combination between the fertility and the mortality, they try to interpret the population changes based on the population trend theory. Okay, so this is that, and I will introduce more about the perspectives of the population changes in the next video.